Have you lost your mind? That procedure could have killed it. The supervisor's voice cut through the ICU like a blade. The nurse didn't move. Her hands still trembled from CPR. The patient wasn't even hers. Not her shift. Not her responsibility. But in a room full of hesitation, she was the only one who acted. And the next morning, a high-ranking military officer stepped into the ICU carrying a sealed black box and asked a question that made the entire hospital fall silent. Ever seen someone punished for doing the right thing? Type 1 if you have. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. My name is Lauren Blake. I've worked as a nurse at Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital for 10 years. Most of our days blend together. Routine vitals, medication charts, quiet halls. But every now and then, something happens that splits your memory in two. Before that day and after. That day began like any other. The ICU wing was already short-staffed. The ER had overflowed from a morning pileup on the interstate, and a flu outbreak had left half the team scrambling. Even the doctors looked like they'd pulled back-to-back shifts. I had just finished checking in a post-op patient when they wheeled in the new transfer, Mr. Henry Maddox, 79. He wore a faded Navy veteran's cap. In his eyes, they didn't dart around like most patients. They held stillness, depth, like they'd watched 100 sunrises over open water and never flinched. His chart said cardiac instability, multiple prior arrhythmias, and a high risk for sudden arrest. He'd been transferred from a VA facility for specialized telemetry, but what stood out more than any line in his chart was how long we had to wait for a doctor. 10 minutes after arrival, he coded. I heard the flat line from the other end of the hallway. I dropped the clipboard I was holding and ran. But by the time I reached room 314, Rachel Hayes was already there. Rachel wasn't even assigned to Maddox's side of the ICU that day. She'd been rerouted from post-op. But when the alarm rang, she didn't wait. Problem was, there was no physician on hand. They were all stuck 2 floors down dealing with a collapsing patient in surgery. The code team was delayed. All available advanced cardiac nurses were already tied up. And in that gap, those terrible 60 seconds of nothing, Rachel made a call. She didn't just start chest compressions. She initiated a pericardiocentesis. It's a high-risk procedure. A needle and catheter inserted into the sac around the heart to drain fluid, sometimes the only way to restart a failing rhythm. And Rachel wasn't certified to do it. She was trained, she'd watched it done, she'd studied under trauma surgeons. But technically, no. Her license didn't permit her to perform that kind of invasive action alone. But she did it anyway. With only a junior med student assisting, she sterilized the site, palpated landmarks, and inserted the needle. The silence in the hallway was so thick, I swear we could hear the moment the catheter hit the right depth. Seconds later, Maddox's pulse returned. The cardiac team burst in half a minute later, shocked to see the line already running and Maddox alive. You'd think they'd cheer, hug her. But no, enter Margaret Sinclair. She was the hospital's director of clinical oversight. And if there was one thing she cared about more than patient outcomes, it was protocol. Her heels clicked like gunshots down the hallway as she entered the room, lips already pursed. What have you done? Rachel was still catching her breath. Her gloves were blood-speckled, hands shaking slightly. She looked up, calm but exhausted. I performed a pericardiocentesis. He was crashing. No one else was here. You are not certified for that, Sinclair hissed. That is a Category A violation. Waiting would have killed him. Waiting would have protected this hospital's liability. And then, without so much as a glance at the patient now breathing again on the bed, Sinclair reached for Rachel's badge, snapped it from her chest, and dropped 5 icy words. You are suspended. Effective immediately. The only sound in the room was the beep of Maddox's recovering heart monitor and the quiet gasp from the med student who just watched a hero get punished. After Rachel was suspended, the mood in the ICU dropped like a curtain. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice or defend herself. She just removed her gloves, wiped the sweat from her face, and walked to the locker room. I followed her, not to say anything heroic, just to be there. She sat in silence for a few minutes, staring at her hands like they were still holding a life. He was fading, Lauren, she finally whispered. I felt it. The fluid was crushing his heart. We didn't have time. I know, I said softly. I saw the monitor. Her voice was steady, but her shoulders had slumped. They're going to end my career over this. There was nothing I could say. She wasn't wrong. By mid-morning, everyone had heard. Nurses stopped talking when admin staff walked by. A few doctors privately expressed their support, but no one dared put it in writing. It was the same old story. Do the right thing, break the rules, and pay for it alone. At 10:15 a.m., an emergency review was scheduled. Hospital admin claimed it was to assess protocol deviations and patient risk. That's code for, we're building a case against her. Margaret Sinclair led the panel, no surprise. I watched from just outside the glass-walled conference room as Rachel took her seat, alone. No union rep, no senior staff backing her. Just 5 faces on the other side of the table. HR, legal, director, compliance. And Sinclair, arms crossed like a prosecutor. She's going to be fired, Jules muttered beside me. They've already made up their minds. I didn't respond, because just then, Rachel's phone vibrated on the bench beside me. She'd forgotten it in her locker. I picked it up out of instinct, then froze. The screen showed one unread message from DM. What she did saved a hero. I'll be there before noon. I stared at the screen. Jules read over my shoulder. Wait, DM? No way. Who? I asked. Daniel Maddox, Henry's younger brother, former general. He's a legend. A chill ran down my spine. How would he know? Jules shook her head slowly. Doesn't matter. If he knows, this is about to get very, very public. I looked back toward the meeting room. Inside, Rachel was being dismantled piece by piece. They showed printouts of hospital protocol, cited licensing laws, replayed security footage of her performing the pericardiocentesis without authorization. But they didn't show the heart monitor stabilizing. They didn't show the moment Maddox started breathing again. They didn't show the life she gave back. She acted recklessly, Sinclair said. This is textbook grounds for revoking her license. Rachel didn't blink. I made a decision to save a patient when no one else was available. There's a chain of command, the compliance officer barked. There was no one to command, she finally snapped, voice breaking through the air like thunder. Everyone froze. I called for help, she continued, hands clenched. No one came. You want to blame someone? Blame the system that left us alone in that room, but don't act like I didn't save him. Outside, a nurse dropped her clipboard in the hallway. The sound echoed all the way to the admin wing. And in that pause, through the glass doors at the main entrance, I saw him. A tall man, black coat, silver hair, straight back like a soldier. He moved with the kind of calm you don't learn, you earn. Under one arm, he carried a polished wooden box. In his other hand, a sealed envelope with a Department of Defense insignia. He stopped at the reception desk. The clerk's jaw dropped. She stood so fast she nearly tipped her chair. She grabbed the phone, and the shift began. Not in the meeting room, not with legal documents, but in the slow realization that someone had just entered this hospital who didn't come to play politics. He came with a purpose. And Rachel Hayes was about to find out she wasn't alone after all. It was 11:58 a.m. I remember the exact time because the second hand on the wall clock seemed to freeze just before noon, like even time itself held its breath. The man in the black coat didn't wait for permission. He walked straight past the reception desk, past visitors, past stunned interns. Each step echoed down the marble hallway, steady as a heartbeat, and then he turned into the administrative wing. I was still outside the meeting room when I saw him. His presence was like gravity, pulling the air tight around him. His metals gleamed under the hospital lights. But what stood out more was the calm in his eyes. The kind of calm that comes from standing on battlefields and making decisions no one else dares to make. He opened the door, without knocking, without asking, and said 7 words that brought the entire room to silence. I'm here about Nurse Rachel Hayes immediately. The panel froze. Margaret Sinclair rose halfway from her seat, caught between anger and confusion. Excuse me, this is a closed... I'm Colonel Daniel Maddox, he said, laying the envelope down on the table. And I suggest you let me speak. No one dared interrupt him again. Rachel turned slowly in her seat. Her face went pale. She recognized the name. Everyone did. Colonel Maddox opened the wooden box he'd carried and turned it toward the table. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a purple heart. Below it, a small black and white photo of a young soldier carrying another on his back through a smoky battlefield. "That's Henry," he said softly. "You're patient." The room fell still. "My brother has 3 decades of service, 3 tours, wounds that still wake him at night. And today he's alive, because a nurse broke protocol and remembered her humanity." He looked directly at Sinclair. "I've reviewed the security footage. I watched the hesitation from your staff. I watched the clocks. I watched the monitors flatline. And I watched one woman move." He turned to the director of the hospital now, voice calm but sharp. "You say she violated scope. I say she upheld the core of medical ethics." Sinclair tried to speak, but the colonel raised a hand. "In the military, we train soldiers to act when there are no orders. It's called initiative. We honor it, not punish it." Then he pulled out a second document, signed, sealed, and official. "This is a petition co-signed by military leadership and members of the Maddox family. If disciplinary action proceeds against Nurse Hayes, we will pursue public investigation into Oak Ridge's emergency staffing failures and systemic delays." The director's face drained of color. Colonel Maddox took a breath, then said one final sentence that no one in that room would forget. "Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier sees is someone like her standing alone." Silence. Then slowly the director stood. Her eyes searched Rachel's. "You saved his life," she said quietly. "And it seems you reminded us all what this place is supposed to stand for." She turned to Sinclair. "Her suspension is lifted, effective immediately." Margaret didn't move, her jaw clenched, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles turned white. But she said nothing. Colonel Maddox stepped forward and extended a hand toward Rachel. She rose to her feet, unsure if she should even accept it. But he gently took her hand and placed something in her palm, a medical insignia pin, the kind worn by military field medics. "You may not wear a uniform," he said, "but make no mistake, what you did yesterday was an act of combat medicine." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes, and for the first time that day, she smiled. Not from relief, but from finally being seen. 3 days later, the air in the ICU felt different. Rachel had returned to work that morning. No announcements, no speeches. Just a quiet nod from the charge nurse and the familiar click of her ID badge sliding through the door reader. She walked in like nothing had changed, but everyone knew it had. This time, no one avoided her gaze. And when she passed Margaret Sinclair in the hallway, even Margaret didn't raise her chin like she used to. She just stepped aside. But the moment that stayed with me most happened in room 314. Rachel entered slowly, unsure if Henry Maddox would even remember her. He was sitting up now, propped against pillows, IV still attached, but color back in his face. His eyes were clear, alert. He looked at her and smiled. "You're the one," he whispered, "the one who didn't wait." Rachel didn't know what to say. She just smiled back and adjusted his monitor gently. "My brother told me everything," Henry said, voice rough with age. "You did what you weren't supposed to do, and because of that, I'm here." Rachel nodded. "I did what I had to do." "No," he said firmly. "You did what was right. That's not always the same." Then slowly the old veteran extended his hand. "I carried men off helicopters in Vietnam," he said, tears rising. "Never thought one day someone would fight for me." Rachel took his hand gently. "That's how it works," she whispered. "We take turns." Later that day, the hospital gathered its full nursing staff for the evening shift change. Sinclair stood at the head of the station, surprisingly composed. But her eyes betrayed a weight she hadn't shown before. She cleared her throat. "I want to address what happened earlier this week," she said. "Rachel Hayes saved a man's life. I responded by suspending her for it." She paused. "I was wrong." The words echoed in the hushed room. "I let procedure override judgment, and I forgot what this place is meant to protect. Because of Nurse Hayes, we're revising our emergency response policy, effective immediately. From now on, any trained nurse may initiate life-saving intervention under what we're calling the Hayes Protocol." There was silence, then slowly one nurse began to clap. Another followed. And within seconds, the entire room rose in applause. Even some of the doctors joined in. Rachel turned pink. but she stood quietly, eyes lowered. That evening, she was called into the director's office one last time. Colonel Maddox was already there, seated beside the hospital board. This time, no one looked confrontational. No one looked ashamed. They looked grateful. The director handed Rachel a folder. We'd like you to lead a new task force to reshape how we train our response teams and how we teach nurses when to trust their instincts. Rachel opened the folder slowly. Inside, a letter of commendation, a framed copy of the new protocol bearing her name. As she left the room, I watched her pause by the ICU window, where Henry sat with his brother beside him, laughing over some shared memory. She didn't say anything, but I knew what she was thinking. Some battles don't need weapons. They just need someone brave enough to act before permission comes, and someone else strong enough to make sure no one forgets why. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.